Welcome to episode 50 of the Pacey Performance Podcast. Today, I'm speaking with performance coach at EXOS, Brett Bartholomew. Hi guys, welcome to episode 50 of the Pacey Performance Podcast. So really excited to bring you episode 50 today. It's been a long journey from episode 1. Hopefully a lot of things have got a lot better. So today we speak to Brett Bartholomew. It's a really good episode with Brett, and I'm so glad that I got him on for episode 50 because I think there's so much to learn. So in the episode we cover core training, we cover the EXOS philosophy and how that fits in with Brett's own philosophy. At the end, we also discuss the importance of coach health, which is, I think, a really good discussion, and I think something that needs to be discussed a hell of a lot more. So today's sponsor for the podcast is, again, Train with Push. So again, a massive thank you to Train with Push for getting on board. And rather than a little review that I normally do or have done in the last couple of podcasts, I think the best thing for me to do is forward you on to their blog. And there's a really nice post from Mladen Jovanovic on the future of velocity-based training and in particular push. So I was speaking to the guys at Push over the last couple of days, and they were talking to me about how they want to take things forward as a company and the development of machine learning. And Mladen really touches on this and gives a really nice insight into how he thinks velocity-based training will move forward in the future. So don't forget, you can get 10% off a push band if you're a US listener. If you go to trainwithpush.com and put in the code PaceyPerform10, that will get you 10% off a push band. If you're a UK listener, go to strengthandconditioningeducation.com, put in PaceyPerform10, and that will get you £10 off a push band. So get involved in the offer. So episode 50 also marks the creation of the Pacey Performance webinar series. So really excited to bring this, and it came about after speaking to Alex Natera and how he presented his podcast in kind of a case study format. And I think the thing that's missing out there is that real hardline information with this is what we did in our setting. These are the real results that we got, and this is how it informed our practice in the future. So every month I'm going to bring you a webinar that's going to be hosted through paceyperformance.co.uk, and it's going to involve top practitioners from around the world presenting in that case study format. So first up in the webinar series, I'm really excited to hear from Dan Baker. So Dan's going to present on the long-term planning of training with an emphasis on the resistance training plan, and it's going to be a case study from the Brisbane Broncos from 2006 to 2013. So it's going to take place on Sunday the 11th of October at 10 a.m. British summertime. But don't worry if you're from elsewhere in the world and you are probably sleeping at that time. If you sign up, you're going to get 2 links. You're going to get one link, which is the live webinar, so you can tune in on the Sunday 11th at 10 o'clock. But you'll also get a link to a recording of the webinar, so you can listen to and watch that anytime in the next 7 days, as many times as you want. So Dan's presentation is going to be obviously visual because it's a webinar. So you will get the slides from Dan's presentation if you register for the webinar. What you won't get is the data that he's going to present, just for obvious reasons. But it's going to be a great hour with Dan. So there's going to be an hour presentation, and there's going to be 15 to 20 minutes of questions from all attendees that you can fire them over to Dan. So if you do want to book, it's going to be $14.99, which converts to 23 American dollars and 33 Australian dollars. So if you do want to book on, go to paceyperformance.co.uk/webinars. On there will be exactly what's going to happen on the morning of the event, all the links to book, and all the information basically that you need. So it'd be really great to see you there. I think there's been other opportunities like this from various people, and the cost is absolutely minimal for the kind of things you're going to hear from presented by Mr. Dan Baker. So enjoy the chat with Brett. Get over to paceyperformance.co.uk. Get on the webinar. I'll speak to you soon. Okay, hi guys, welcome to the Pacey Performance Podcast. So today we have Brett Bartholomew on the line. So a couple of weeks ago, I put out a Twitter message asking people who they'd like to see on the podcast or hear on the podcast, and Brett's name came up numerous times, so we had to get him on. So just before we get going, just want to thank Brett for his time, taking some time out in the middle of his day. So thank Brett for his time and just ask him to give us a little bit of an introduction on his background, his education, and what he's currently doing. So welcome to the podcast, Brett.
Yeah, thank you. My pleasure, Rob. So background education, I started at Kansas State University and got my undergraduate degree in kinesiology. They had a great program down there, and so spent some time down there. And once I had graduated from that, I had started my internship at what was then Athletes Performance, or now EXOS. So I had packed some bags and talked people into an opportunity that had originally told me no about 1,000 times. And went down to Florida and did that. That led to a volunteer position at the University of Nebraska, which for any of your listeners that may not know, that's where Boyd Epley pretty much started much of the formalities of this profession in the 70s. And the Husker Power program was a very big piece in terms of the innovations that happened early on within our field, especially in the United States. So wanted to go learn from them. I always kind of looked at them as the Harvard law of strength and conditioning. Whether people agree with that or not is, of course, up to their own experience. After that, I went to graduate school. I didn't have any previous desires to go back to school, but an opportunity presented itself where I could pretty much coach full time and get my master's degree paid for. So wanted to take advantage of that and ended up getting a master's degree in essentially motor learning. It was exercise science, but emphasis on motor learning and motor skill development, while also coaching. I was a head strength coach for about 8 Olympic sports there, men's and women's teams of all different sports. And then I was an assistant for football and basketball. And then long story short, ended up back at EXOS down in the Florida location, working with a lot of tactical population, youth, general population as well. And then that started to evolve into a position in Arizona where I currently work, where I spearhead our NFL program as well as our UFC program, and then moonlight on the side with our Major League and Minor League Baseball development program. So that's where I'm at now.
Cool. So what do you mean by tactical population?
Yeah, so military special forces,
okay.
So Marines, Navy, Air Force, everything involved with special forces with the United States military. Was heavily involved with that for a while in terms of going around to different bases, serving operators that would come to our location in Florida. So a wide range of both educational and coaching-based interactions and responsibilities with them.
Cool. So yeah, the NFL guys that you work with, what time of year are you in now? Is you coming to the season or coming to preseason?
Yeah, so they're at camp with their teams now. So my job with them is done now. It's an interesting thing with the new collective bargaining agreement that took place around 2010, 2011. That only leaves strength coaches on NFL teams about 5 weeks to develop their guys, and so it severely limited the amount of time that these guys could spend with their teams in the off season. And so typically what happens is we'll have guys that will roll in anywhere from January or February through April until they go to what are called organized team activities, or OTAs, or mini camps with their club. And they'll spend about 5 weeks with them, depending on, if they're a rookie, veteran, the position type, what have you. And then they'll come back for a short stint prior to actual training camp. So that's usually about a 3 to 5 week phase, depending on the athlete and if they want to spend some time with family and their own individual schedule. And so that then we'll train them up to training camp where they go back to their club. So basically what that says is, since their team strength coaches only have 5 weeks to prepare them, obviously that's not really ideal for the type of sport and that long of a season. They'll get started in August with preseason games and play all the way through January or February if they go through the Super Bowl. And so we kind of become an assistant strength coach by nature to their teams, because we've got to make sure that they're well developed and they're ready to go, because guys they don't have the ability to just kind of, rest around, get fat, get out of shape, and then, rely on 5 weeks to get them going again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the strength coaches from the teams don't have any say in what you do? They're not allowed to have a say?
Yeah, so no, we're separate entities. That being said, there are relationships that exist between myself and strength coaches with other teams where we have similar, thought processes or philosophies. So they feel comfortable sending their guys to me, and I have a sense of what they're expected to do with their team. So communication can take place certain times a year, but there's also times of the year, to your point, Rob, where no, I can't reach out to them and talk to them directly. But usually that's not needed, and they know their guys benefit from doing some different stuff in the off season. They're with them year round. And so if their guys can go out and learn a couple different things and get out there, that's, they're just happy that most of them are doing something organized as opposed to going to a 24-hour fitness or, just, playing hoops or doing something unorganized. So there is a balance there, and there's a mutual trust and respect that needs to take place. But no, they don't have control over what we do, just like we don't have control over what they do.
Mm-hmm. That was going to be my next question. So are some guys in the NFL in this period just doing their own thing, going to the, like you say, 24-hour gym and kind of running their own program?
Yeah, not during this time of year, but during earlier in the year. Yeah. During certain times of year, sure, there's going to be players that obviously invest more heavily in their training and want to seek out a professional and continue to go learn. And then there's going to be guys that instead of training, maybe they just go work out. They shoot some hoops and they do some stuff to keep their body maybe looking right. But obviously, there's a big difference between that and true physical preparation or performance. So you hope that, as a team strength coach, that's a very small, assorted few of your guys. Generally you're going to want to try to guide them to stay around as long as they can per the NFL rules and mandates. Otherwise, you're going to try to give them a little bit of a recommendation in terms of somebody that or trust to go see. And my job, Rob, is to be the guy that they know or trust and go see, so I can help them out.
Absolutely. And so the payment that they pay themselves, it's all privately kind of funded?
In terms of Exos?
In terms of the athlete using your facility, using your, everything. Do they pay themselves or do the clubs pay?
No. They'll pay themselves. Okay. So again, you attract a certain kind of clientele that, know that this is an investment, which is good, and so that's one nice thing is we do get guys that typically come in and they're not here to lollygag. They're paying too much money, and so when they come in here, sure, you're always going to have different personalities, just like you will in any sport. But essentially, you're going to have guys that are here ready to work because they just pay too much not to.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So I just want to go into the kind of Exos philosophy a little bit. Obviously, you've got plenty of experience from working there in a couple of different times. So I just want to talk to us about the Exos philosophy as a whole and how your personal philosophy kind of fits in with that.
Yeah. So I think, the big thing is our philosophy is very much, based on principles, not methods. And you hear that a lot, right? But the thing is it's all encompassing. Everybody knows that our field changes a lot, and we have to stay on top of the ever evolving nature of it. So, you walk into an Exos, you're not going to see some, very odd kind of new age exercises. We're squatting, we're deadlifting, we're cleaning, we're sprinting. We do try to keep a sound movement based approach with things. And where everything, we don't look at exercises, we just look at human movements, right? And I think that was a newer kind of concept in the early 2000s. I think now that's pretty much the norm, or at least you'd like to think it is. But most people in the know understand that. You squat, you hinge, you push, you pull. And the big thing that I think is different is not just the training-based philosophy, in the weight room, but it's how we address the movement outside, how we break down the skills in terms of acceleration, speed, multi-directional movement, deceleration. And then not only that, but the communication aspect of it. When I first came here, that was one of the first things that I really learned is that we wanted to unite people's purpose with our process. And you can only do that when you communicate well. And everybody here was always so purposeful and methodical with the words they chose and the way that they spoke. And it just seemed like the athletes really understood it on a different level compared to, when you're in a team setting, sometimes you can get in the habit of just barking orders and kind of just, and sometimes you got to, that's the nature of the time that you have. But there is that element of language is important, language is supremely important. It colors, kind of the mental pictures that we're trying to impose in their mind. And so that's a big thing that I learned here was the movement side of it in terms of on the field and the communication aspect of it as well. Other than that, man, we're just a group of individuals that wants to get people right and do it in a really ethical and responsible way.
So is the kind of communication side of things something that's actively kind of promoted within EXOS, as in you have, meetings about how that actually takes place, or is it from your respective backgrounds?
I think
it just kind of comes together.
Yeah, I think it's just the people, we tend to hire, and we try to hire people that fit with that DNA. So we don't necessarily meet on it. We will talk about it for sure. Everybody will, kind of have those coaching side conversations of, I cued this way today, or I did this, or I said this, and they really got that. I think it's just a thing that, we always talk about it, motivation through education. These people, you need to start with why. And so being able to communicate and break everything down for them, because we always say it, right? You haven't taught something until somebody's really learned it. So I can have people run cone drills all day long. That doesn't mean that they know shit about how to actually cut and decelerate. But when I deconstruct that drill and I actually break down and describe to them where their body should be, their shin angle should be, their center of mass, and then they start to really truly understand that, and it comes to life in their own mind. So I think that communication piece is always huge and something that probably more people need to pay attention to.
Absolutely. So I just want to dig a little bit deeper in the kind of how you break down a skill and how you actually teach that and coach that to an athlete. Do you just want to give a bit more detail in how that process works?
Yeah. So a little bit of I'll try to narrow down a broad sense. My motor learning background is I don't chase perfection. I chase, just progress. So if I'm looking at a skill and I want to, regardless of the sport, let's say we're just doing a basic deceleration drill or a cone agility drill, I'll try to reverse engineer that, where I'll have somebody sometimes run through the drill in itself, and I'll use that as a screen. Now I'll kind of get an idea of, okay, what did they tend to do? How did they take that cut? How did they accelerate through that? How did they transition? And then I'll start to break apart the constituent pieces there. Then I'll talk to them and I'll say, what did you notice about that first transition? And let's say they were getting ready to do a drop step. And they're like, I pitter-pattered too much going into that cut. Right. Okay, so let's work on decel first, right? So you'll start to reverse engineer it a little bit and have them work on, maybe 5, 10, 15 meter accelerations into a base decel. And then you'll start constructing the hip turn out of that, teaching them how to actually push off the lead leg and open up the hips. And then you just start to build it on one another. It's no different than an architect shows a blueprint for a building. And that's great. The blueprint looks fantastic. Maybe they've even done a 3D model of it. But now you've got to lay the pieces. So that's how I look at it. I think in the past I'd made the mistake, Rob, of, saying, okay, we're going to teach acceleration today. And I'd gone out and I'll teach, wall drills to get them in the perfect position. And then I'll do it with bungees or harnesses. And, I'll take that perfect position we worked on the wall and start making it more dynamic. And then bungees and harnesses lead into sleds, and then sleds lead into free. And there's a spot for that. There's a spot for that kind of linear blocked method. But there's another time where knowing that movement is random and chaotic, just because you see that session flows and in your head, it works nicely to focus on posture, pattern, and power, doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to connect with the athlete the same way. So that's when I started evolving into, okay, let's have an athlete perform something. That way it gives him context. So when I tell him or her that we need to work on this aspect of it, it's not me just being a guru and saying that and asking for blind faith and trust. They actually felt that they sucked on that transition or cut, or that it could be better. And then they're along with me on the journey to help make that better. So it sounds complicated. It's really not. You could do it easily in the team setting, and we did as well, where you have several rotating stations where, let's say, one station is a W drill or a simple 4-cone reaction drill, and that's the most advanced method, right? And then your other 3 stations all take pieces of that. Maybe one works on decel, maybe one works on acceleration into a different kind of cutting technique, and then another one works on the plyometric components involved with that movement skill and just movement in general, right? So you could break it down into 3 separate components of it. You could break it down into one working on your posture, pattern, and power principles. There's a lot of ways, and I think that is where you start to differentiate yourself as a coach. Is it's not just about having the colors that you can use to paint that picture. It's knowing how to blend them together. So at the end, Rob, then you can say, all right, guys, we worked on this skill at the beginning. As you went to all these stations, you learned a different component of movement skills, whether it's decel, acceleration, or even ground-based force production with the plyos. You guys understand how everything you do on the field or the pitch or the court or the ice translates into that, right? And that's what you've got to do with these athletes, I think, is you've got to help them. And sure, there's going to be some that don't give a shit, but they're not going to care regardless, right? So somebody could listen to this and be like, oh, that's nice. My guys don't care. We just got to work. Well, there are some guys that care. So you need to start looking at breaking your athletes down into archetypes and think, hey, how are you communicating with all of them? Because if you're all assuming they're dumb kids, or if you are all assuming they're crusty veterans that don't really, don't really care about the nuances of this, you're missing the boat on some of them that really do want to know.
Mm-hmm. So what's the response been like from how you started to what you do now from the athlete's point of view?
Yeah, well, I'll still do both depending on the athlete, So there are some athletes that will respond better to that kind of linear method, especially if they're kind of a very technical minded or mechanically minded guy where they've got to see that natural progression. But the response for some of the athletes that are a bit more just have a competitive nature that drives them is they love it because they see, man, like you just showed me a very distinct way that even if I was good at that drill, one, how I can get better at it by looking at each piece of that movement puzzle, so to speak, as a different part and its constituent parts. Or if they weren't good at it, it can really help them break out why. I mean, isn't this why the FMS was such a big deal? Is people would say, okay, it's not perfect, but it's a screen. And I can see that guy sucks with load on his back because look, he's a clear 1 on the overhead squat and the movement. And so this is the same thing. A guy may not know why he or she can't do this drill with the fluidity that they want. But then when you start to break out the points of that, whether it was them getting stuck on the decel or whether they don't have enough power on the acceleration, or maybe they just don't have great, multi-directional movement skills of keeping a low center of gravity. So that messes up their transition on the cut, or they take an extra step. It helps them identify it. And that has definitely gotten a good response in terms of the athletes I've worked with, is because it makes your purpose, it connects with what they want to get better at too. And they're along for the ride with that rather than just being a piece of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So just the next thing I want to talk about, the kind of thought for it came because I was watching some English Premier League games over the weekend, and it showed you the guys doing the warm-up. I can't remember who it was, Manchester City or something. Yep. And they had the guy in the middle, they get the guys around, all the bands out, they all had the kind of hop and holds, that kind of thing. And then they cut back to the studio, and there was an ex-manager in there who was maybe, I don't know, 50, 60. And I just thought, I wonder what he thinks watching that from when he managed and played maybe 30 years ago. And I just wanted to get to know kind of how things, movement prep-wise, how you do that at Exos and how that's kind of evolved over time.
Yeah. To address first things first, I think one thing is really important to know is we like to imagine ourselves now, so advanced that we have the best, our movement prep, and by ourselves, I don't mean Exos, I mean all of us in this community, we got movement prep down, and can you believe what they used to do back in the day? And we think we have all the answers. And the reality, some of the shit they did then was great. And some of the stuff we may do now might be a little bit of overkill. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people, it's like this idea of, okay, we've got to do pre-gen, then you've got to do your correctives, then you've got to warm up. It's like, did you just call something pre-gen? What is this now? It's like every week there's something new, where in reality, you get somebody doing, and again, I'm speaking in general terms, so nobody needs to jump out of their chair, but you get somebody doing some solid jumping jacks, body weight squat, multi-directional lunges, some push-ups, a few sprints, a few hops or bounds in different planes. By and large, you're going to be ready for just about whatever you need to be ready for, and there definitely is a fine line, and it depends on the population, the people, and the place that you're in. But I think it's evolved from just people being able to really look at readiness. And I don't mean the type that we're monitoring with Omega Wave and stuff, but actually saying, hey, are we actually preparing the body to play? Is there a real specific theme to this? Or are we just doing a bunch of stuff haphazardly thrown together? I look at it, the difference between it's like a menu. You can't just throw stuff on there. Otherwise, nobody will know what your restaurant serves. It's all got to have it. If you're a bar, if it's bar food, all right, make it consistent with that. If it's Italian, you probably don't want to have tacos there. So your warm up, anybody should be able to look at that and say, okay, you're clearly getting ready for a weight room session, a general movement session, acceleration emphases, or multi-directional emphases. And you should be able to tell by that, right? If what do they say? They say that a sheep herder should smell like sheep, and I think it's the same thing with your program design. Like, it should be pretty self-evident what you're doing if you do it right.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So just going back to what you said at the start about your time that you have with your NFL guys, yep. I just want to kind of dig a little bit deeper in how you, with such a short space of time that you have them, how do you prioritize what you do in that time, obviously with the guys paying and with time being so precious?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. So just like any strength coach, I periodize it out where I look at the intensification across stages of development, knowing that, prior to them leaving and going to OTAs, the weight room stuff is going to be the most intense in terms of doing more maximal strength or power development. Then they usually, when they're with their teams, that 5-week span, many of the coaches and their teams are just doing a general kind of preparation phase, where again, it's almost kind of introductory, and the teams are smart to do that because they don't know what their guys have been doing. It's not that the teams are being lazy. They just don't know what their guys are doing or have been doing, and they need to see. But from my standpoint, I always try to make sure that the guys that train with me, when they go into that with their team, the coach raises his eyebrows and thinks, okay, you guys, this should be a cakewalk for you. And then, so it serves as kind of an unload for them too, because after I get hard and heavy with them, they'll go do basically a general prep program. They may take a week off or so, and then they'll come back to me, and then we start getting right back into strength, power endurance type themes, depending on the guys we get. So the interesting thing is I can have very different guys in June and July than I had in March or April. Just because they came here at the beginning of the year, or it doesn't mean that they're going to come back. And that's just people, their individual proclivities. Like I have one guy that comes in, and Don Terry Poe with the Kansas City Chiefs. Every year for the past 4 years, I know he's going to train with me February, March, and April. And then he goes back home for June and July so he can see his family. And he works out with his college strength coach there. Conversely, I have another guy that plays for the Saints that I will never see him in the spring. He's got, he'll visit with family. He'll go do his own thing. And but then he always comes in June and July. So it kind of just depends where the players live, their timing, their availability. But the bottom line is I look at the 2 phases I got to get them ready for, which is OTAs and then obviously training camp. And those, the phases that I designed prior to those are the most intense phases. So just like anything else, but I always try to get pretty competitive, and it's my goal that whenever they go back to their team thinks, what the hell have you guys been doing? So keep it simple, but also just, I think, simple things done savagely.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So you're getting people at different stages. Obviously, physically, they come in at different stages.
Yeah.
So how are you finding the kind of ground from which to build your program? What's the first thing you do when they come in?
It's got to be adaptable. So one of the first things that I do when I'm designing the program is all the time, whether I'm programming a bench press, a squat, a deadlift, what have you, I give them options of that movement. So because to your point, I don't know how many guys are going to have shoulder injuries, how many guys haven't been training, how many guys may not like, straight bar bench press. And at that level, listen, when you work in the college side of things in United States, guys are going to do what you're going to program. But when you get guys that are 8-9 years in the NFL, their bodies are pretty beat up. You got to give them a little bit of autonomy. And at the end of the day, who cares as long as they're doing that movement with the right intensity? So the first thing I do is always I start them on a general program. We'll maybe do that for 2 weeks. It's a very short block just to get an idea of what I'm working with, right? And then I have a series of programs that I'll kind of build out after that, whether I say, okay, well, these guys are pretty fit. We can bump them into a more aggressive strength program already. Or, man, these guys are already pretty strong, but a lot of them lack that elasticity, rate of force production, or power. Maybe we need to bump them to this. So I use 2 to 3 weeks as kind of an assessment, and then I'll build it out from there. And then as I alluded to earlier, they all have a choice. So if it's bench press, it'll say, dumbbell or barbell. If it's squat, it would be 2 kettlebell, front squat, back squat, or safety squat. And then I just start to build out an adaptable model so that no matter where they are in their development, it's very easy to kind of guide them along. Because one of the unique things we face here is I'll have 25 to 30 guys, but it's just myself and an intern. Periodically throughout the year, I might have another coach that comes out and assists me depending on staff availability, but I've got to be able to run the program just by myself. So it's got to be pretty no nonsense, again, basics, but done in an intelligent way.
Mm-hmm. So there's no other coaches in Arizona that do that job that you're doing?
Within Exos or in Arizona in general?
Within Exos.
Oh, no, not with the NFL. So we all kind of have our own niche. Mine is football and fighters at this point, and our other coaches will be running groups of their own. So how it typically works, and it's good that you asked that because I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there. Is we'll have groups run from about 6 to 8 p.m. So we have an early morning guy that does kind of general population. He'll run groups at like 6, 7, a noon group, and then an evening group, for people that get off work. I'll take football players. We have another coach that does college athletes, another coach that does baseball. So I'll typically work the 8 o'clock. So I'll typically have an 8, 10, 1, and 3 o'clock group, but there may be another group running at 8 as well. So anyways, you get 2 to 3 coaches that are working the same kind of time frame. And that generally leaves one coach per group with maybe the assistance of an intern. So definitely a situation. I mean, in Exos Arizona in general, we only have 4 coaches. And there's hundreds of athletes that'll come through the door. So you're coaching your butt off with, minimal additional staff support, much of the year. So that's one reason the integrated model works well, though, because then, you have that communication to be able to draw upon. When you are short-staffed, at least everybody knows what everybody's doing.
Awesome. So just moving on again, when I was writing these out, actually, that I forwarded to you, I was reading a couple of things at the same time as you do. And one was a Greg Nuckols article about core training, and how increasing his amount of specific core training, how that helped his squat. And I just wanted to get your opinion and your thoughts on core training itself and how you do that at Exos.
What I've learned is that I really don't know shit about that topic. And from the standpoint that I think I've gone through a lot of evolutions, when I was younger, and I mean younger before I got into this profession. Have you ever seen the movie American Psycho?
I haven't.
Okay, well,
obviously know what it is.
It's going to be a bad joke then.
Yeah,
but
okay.
Christian Bale in the movie is just, basically a nutcase, and every night he does like thousands of crunches. I've been that guy.
Okay.
I did that. I saw my first Rocky movie when I was like 14, and I'm like, that's it. Crunches and push-ups every night. So I'd been that guy that, had done flexion early on. I think I've always kind of struggled with some back issues. And so, once people started talking more about, functional training in terms of, hey, planks, bridges, more anti-rotation stuff, I jumped on that pretty hard. But then you start looking at it and you're like, yeah, well, I get that the body isn't necessarily meant to flex all the time, but it still flexes. And I feel like we've got to, train everything. And Nebraska taught that really well, where they didn't look at just rotation or, flexion and anti-flexion and just stability or anything. What they looked at is they said, hey, listen, the torso You have to train rotation, flexion, extension. They even talked about abduction and adduction because, again, they looked at the whole like trunk and torso, which they considered the hips a part of that. They looked at 9 different components of how you could do your torso training. And, that really has always made the most sense to me because I think any time I got rid of any kind of flexion, or even when I went through the bout of, I do enough push-ups, pull-ups, squats, heavy bench presses, heavy presses, I don't need to do any of this. Inevitably, my back would creep up on me again. And I'd say, okay, well, I get that you're getting a lot of organic, quote unquote, core strength through these, but I also feel like you need something to support that a bit. And so I feel like I've gone every round. I've gone just do the main lifts, do the 9 different types of torso work. Now let's just dial that back and let's really work on propulsive rotational movements, anti-rotation movements, and different other kinds of forms of stability. And I think where I sit now is probably a little bit more like Greg. I think that, listen, you've got to do the meat and potatoes for sure. And I think the majority of your quote unquote, again, core work will take care of itself if you're learning how to reflexively stabilize and brace and do the things you want to do. But I also think that there's a place for, reverse crunches or, straight leg sit-ups and different get-up variations and even hanging knee raises and definitely rollouts and all that. You just got to make sure that, again, you're budgeting correctly. It's kind of like, it becomes silly if that's taken much more than 10 to 15 minutes, if that. I think I maybe spend probably 5-10 minutes on it in terms of formal core work. Of course, that's different if you're considering waiters walks, farmers carries, things. So I just think that we get into these exclusionary forms of thinking. And I think the reality is the body's pretty dynamic and it's functioned a long time doing some goofy shit. And so, let's just train it, and let's not overthink it and just understand that you probably want to have a little bit of a balanced approach. And I think the guy that does no flexion is just as bad as the guy that only does flexion. And, that's just a brief example. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're seeing obviously a lot of guys come through your doors, which have had a lot of influences going around the country, even around the world. What influences are you seeing? Are you seeing a similar thing where people have kind of been around the block with regards to flexion, no flexion? What are you seeing come back now with the guys that come through your doors?
Yeah, I think, it hasn't really been a hot topic, the guys in our doors, to be honest with you. But I think most people, quote unquote, in the know is everybody just looks at it as, I don't know. Do it, it depends on the person. Do a balance of it. Kind of look where you're weak and look at the nature of the sport and the movement. I think one thing's for sure is people look at training the core in terms of specificity, and thankfully people are starting to come to their senses from the standpoint of, we get a lot of baseball folks in here and they always say, it's a rotational sport. What are you doing to train rotation? It's like, actually not that much other than med ball throws. Your son rotates enough throughout the year. We're working a little bit more stability. And so I think that's the thing, ironically, Rob, that I've seen is people, when it looks at core training people have started to quit following specificity and look at it more as a system, approach in and of itself. We're like, listen, we hit a little bit of everything. We try to keep it balanced. And that's the reality.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So you put a lot out, you're very active on Twitter, putting out lots of great information. And I just wondered there's obviously a lot of influences going on there. It's not just kind of training influences. There's a lot of external influences as well. I just wanted to ask you who them guys are, and even in the field, even strength and conditioning itself, who are your kind of go-to guys?
I think one of my early influences was when I was in the team setting. I had a boss who was incredibly intelligent, but he was really critical. And so this was at a time when not many teams were sharing their stuff online. And if you did, it was almost kind of like you were opening yourselves up for negative attention. So, we'd be watching what a school was doing at a particular time, and he'd come in and be like, oh, what's this? What's that? Like, I don't got time to do that. I coach, but then you started seeing this evolution where people realized that, sunlight is really the best disinfectant in terms of helping people understand the kind of work you do at the place that your place of employment. And, it's better to put your stuff out there. And it really opens up gaps of what would normally be gaps of communication. And so I think I think sitting there and understanding his point of view to a degree that, yeah, I don't have a bunch of time to make videos, but at the same time, what's my goal in this field? My goal is to, leave a legacy and hopefully help others in the field and give them ideas and kind of like the All Blacks say with their jersey, leave it in a better place. So I was like, you know what? I don't know if it's going to help anybody, but I'm going to share some shit. And I started doing it, and I really didn't think anybody would care less about what I had to say. And people started taking to it. And I think it was just maybe my approach of, I've always kind of been just a no bullshit guy. Like, I don't have any secrets. And if I do, I try to share them. But I learn from everybody. Ironically, I think the people that influenced me the most, now that I talked about the situation that influenced me the most, were people that had nothing to do with this profession. I look at people like 50 Cent. I looked at people like Robert Greene. I looked at people like Richard Branson. I looked at a lot of people that really realized that the key to getting more and more people involved in bettering an area or strengthening a product is through engagement. And regardless of what anybody thinks about what any of those people post, the reality is that they were all people that study human nature and knew how to grab people's attention, but in an authentic way where they actually gave them something useful too, And so that started my interest in really saying, okay, now, not what can I put out, because I know I can send videos of this is the kettlebell swing, this is the squat, I wanted to put stuff out that really connected with questions that maybe people had out there. So I took a lot of things that interns asked, that other coaches asked, or that, I knew that during a more self-conscious part of my early career, I would think and ask, feel like they can always check out my page to get that answered without them necessarily feeling like, they have to go to someone else. It's like, hey man, like this is something that you may think about. Don't worry yourself over creating the perfect program. Just take notes on, the process along the way and what you can do better. Boom. All of a sudden I got like 20 likes and I'd be like, what? And, people just really appreciate those that share. And I think that have nothing to hide. And I promise that's all I try to be. I have nothing to hide. I have no secrets. If it helps, that's awesome. But all I want to do is kind of take what people might be thinking of and wondering and what might be a hot topic at the time and demystifying it and kind of give people a real world sense of it.
Because one thing that does come across, Brett, is your kind of positivity. Where does that positivity come from? Just the love of the job?
No, that would be the politically correct answer. I certainly do love the job for sure. It came from, almost losing my life when I was about 15, 16 years old. After that, I learned a couple things real quick is obviously that life is short and, you can't go through it worrying about, what other people think. And really, you only get one chance to really create a footprint in this world. And what kind of footprint do you want to leave? I don't really give a shit if somebody looks at me as the master of speed or acceleration. What I want people to look at me at is that dude knew how to get every inch out of everybody he worked with. And it wasn't through screaming or yelling or all this nonsense. It was just, he knew how to connect with that person and he knew how to connect the dots. So I think it's just a love for wanting to leave a positive impact, as goofy as that sounds. But when you almost lose your life, man, that's what you care about doing. And so that's the key there for sure. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Absolutely. No, it's no problem. So just last but not least, one thing that I wanted to make sure I touched on, especially with the kind of linked in with the positivity stuff, is there was an article on Elite FTS, I'm sure you read it, about kind of coach health. And so I think it's something that's kind of missed. And there was a friend, Chris Toombs, actually you might know, I think he's been down to your place, put something at the weekend about interns in college working from kind of 5 till 8 and 5 till 9, as in 5 a.m. till 9 p.m. And I just kind of, it resonated with me because I just think we kind of get it all wrong. And I kind of put some messages back and forth with Chris, and I just wanted to get your take on the kind of importance of coach health, as well as our obvious focus on athlete health.
Yeah, no, you guys, you're spot on, and shout out, like Chris is great. He put some great stuff there. And I think you're completely right, Rob. We've gotten this wrong for a long time. One of the first books I was ever given when I came into this profession was called First In, Last Out, Lessons of the New York Fire Department. And I worked with a guy that, man, he was in at 5 a.m. every day. He'd eat his lunch precisely at the same time every day, train every day at the same time. And he'd almost try to like stay there every night later than I did. And at that time, we were both graduate assistants. So I get the competitiveness of it. But in him doing that, I think he lost kind of the realistic part of that personality that most people connect with that really doesn't have to do with shit, being the first one in and last one out. People can say that, oh yeah, that displays passion. No, really what that displays at the end of the day is a form of extremism. If you're just staying there just to stay there, then you're not really being a balanced example of a coach, because you see these are the same people, and this kid was included. He ended up losing his fiance. I've seen other coaches lose their marriage. You've alluded to it. They lose their health. They become hooked on different kind of painkillers, energy drinks, and it's like a slow creep. Everybody starts as a graduate assistant or a young coach, and they just run on that natural energy. And, they're training and life's great. And I use the facility and I go hard. And then eventually a small thing takes place where maybe they start drinking more coffee, or if it's not coffee, it's energy drinks. Or maybe if it's not energy drinks, they find themselves leaving the facility just for small spurts throughout the day just to get out of that environment. And then eventually that becomes their body starts breaking down. They wake up one morning and they don't necessarily want to go to work and they don't know why. Even if this doesn't describe somebody that's listening to right now, there are some others that are listening to it and are like spot on. It's not about first in and last out. It's about working smart and getting out. And who are we to sit here and preach all this bullshit about, hey, get your sleep, pay attention to your stress levels, get your training in, all this. And if we don't do it ourselves, because it's not bullshit, that's what you need. And so I think whether you're a coach that doesn't train, or you think it's awesome that you get 5 hours of sleep a night, or that you go in and you're the most hardcore guy because you wake up at 3 a.m. and run into work and do the lift with your players, that's all well and good, but nobody remembers that shit. You might get a cool article written about you in the local paper or internet, but at the end of the day, you're going to be remembered by what kind of father or husband you are, or, wife, for the lady strength coaches that are listening. You're going to get an article. You're going to be remembered for what kind of mentor you are, so coach health is a huge problem. And, Mark Watts and Brian Mann talk about it in the States here too. You're getting a lot of people that don't really retire either in a great financial state or a great physical state. And it can't be like that. You can't be so focused on upgrading lives at the extent of, downgrading your own. And so it's a scary thing. And I think that there's going to have to be along the lines with, job opportunities. And I think that comes from just increasing, enhancing our job environment in general, whether it's the stability, whether it's the jobs available, whether it's our pay, and all these things. Coaches oftentimes get caught up in that. Yeah, this is a service-based industry, and, we're called to guide and mentor and lead. But people miss the whole purpose of that. You're not really a worthy mentor if you don't first embody consistently the values that you preach to others. And I think instead of doing that, we've got caught preaching this ideal. And why does it have to be ideal for people that are just athletes? You're going to be a better teacher if you're a healthier teacher. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You've got to make sure that you're a centered self if you're going to be able to give yourself in the best way to others. And I just think that's got to be communicated to young coaches, because that's not how I was brought up with it. And that's not how a lot of people are. You're not taught, you're taught about, hey, what sacrifices are you going to make? What are you going to do? And for sure, you've got to have that to weed out the turds that are in here for free gear, or the glory of working with athletes. But you've also got to be able to, once you've got guys that you think are pretty switched on, you've got to let them know, now listen, I expect you to be an embodiment of the values we preach here. Pay attention to your family, take care of yourself, be a great example for these young men and women. Otherwise, there's no place for you here. And I don't know, that's my rant on that, because I think there are a lot of great coaches that unfortunately deal with a lot of health issues, and I've been no stranger to them as well, most recently in my career. So you got to be smart.
So why do you think that is, and why do you think that kind of really hardcore, almost like military approach is kind of encouraged a lot of the time?
Yeah, there's probably a lot of reasons. The one thing I think is just, it's the nature of, we're a bunch of intense dudes in this field. We like weight training. A lot of us that got into it were probably average or slightly above average athletes that, probably didn't make it, but man, we'd grind and we were able to really, give it our best shot through the things that we could control. You can't control your genetics, but we were all kind of weight room. We all fell in love with sport or the weight room at some point. We wanted to carry that on. And so we have this tremendous amount of intensity and passion. And then we naturally seek out these books to expand our knowledge or try to find a way to aim that arrow, so to speak, that we kind of naturally shoot. And these books happen to be, motivational or military-based books or inspirational-based books or, things that just talk about cultures. And so then we imagine ourselves as, okay, we're the person that has to drive that culture and everybody has to get it. Not everybody has to be like you. There's a lot of people that see the sky differently, no matter where they come from. And they can embody an ideal and a value and still see it differently than you. It's just kind of like when we talk about neutral posture. Well, it's a neutral posture for somebody that's naturally lordotic isn't going to be the same neutral posture for somebody that, maybe just aligned to an ideal degree. And so these people as well, we're just trying to make incremental changes in people's lives. But what we try to do is we try to flood them with as much information and passion and all this. And so I think sometimes it just comes back to, stepping outside yourself and understanding what's my ultimate goal here. My goal is to make these kids better, give them an example, or lengthen their career, or teach them how they can manage this all better. And their way of doing it may not be my way. It may be, this common thread of, all right, we're just trying to get you to take care of your body. I know that I'm the type of guy that's going to go to all ends of the earth to try to do that. But maybe for this guy, it just means him getting a massage once a month, And so I think you got to address behavior change really carefully. And it starts with first understanding the message that you send. But long story short, man, I think it's just because we're a very intense kind of breed and we're very passionate. And so we try to inculcate that in other people as quick as possible. And we end up turning on the fire hydrant instead of maybe the basic kitchen faucet.
Do you think that's another reason to have influences outside strength and conditioning? So like you said, Richard Branson, and learn from these guys and how they deal with the kind of pressure and the long hours and things like that?
Without a doubt. The number one book I recommend everybody reads, and I could care less if you're in the Strength and Conditioning Hall of Fame or you're just starting or you don't even know what, a Turkish get-up is you need to read the book Mastery by Robert Greene. And in the book Mastery by Robert Greene, he documents and profiles everybody from Charles Darwin to Benjamin Franklin to some that people maybe have never even heard of, but just a wide range, even Napoleon Bonaparte's in there. And he talks about all these people that made their own ripple in history and the path they took to get there and, who influenced them and what about human nature did they really master, whether it was social awareness or social fluency or empathy or, what really helped the gears in their head be so switched on at a faster rate than everybody else. And it talks about their journey. And you're going to see so many parallels in your own journey. It talks about one gentleman named Ignaz Semmelweis that is literally the guy that founded the reason why we should all sterilize and wash our hands. And at the time, and I talk about this in a presentation I give, at the time, people were dying of a disease called childbed fever. 1 in 6 or 2 in 6, I can't remember the exact number, women were dying at the hospital, and they realized that it was because these doctors were doing the autopsies on people that had childbed fever, and then they were going to deliver a baby. Whereas, if a midwife delivered the baby, there was a lower incidence of mortality. So nobody knew why at the time. And this young doctor named Ignaz Semmelweis postulated that I think, we're contaminating them. And I think people should sanitize and wash their hands. But at that time, that wasn't part of the medical kind of orthodoxy. There was no sterilization. There was no hand washing. So, people had asked Ignaz, they had said, why don't you make sure and, put this in some journals and find some research to support it or create your own and state your case as is the normal process of the time. And Ignaz Semmelweis didn't have a high degree of social intelligence. So instead of doing what was asked of him and forwarding and his cause, he started to get angry. And he said, are you kidding me? You're going to have me waste time doing all this when I'm telling you clear as day, this is how you're going to save these lives. I've watched it. I've documented it. You're murdering people for every moment you don't do this. And he just continued to get more outrage and vitriolic until the point where they basically, the medical community completely ignored him. He was put in an insane asylum, and of all things, died of septicemia. And then 10 years later, Louis Pasteur had proven his work and showed that this guy was right all along, should have washed his hands. And so it's fascinating that somebody can read that, and somebody may be a very knowledgeable strength coach or physiotherapist or a practitioner of another sort, but no matter how they communicate, they may feel like they just can't get through to people. And so then that story highlights the importance of, well, let's take a look at how you communicate. Right? Like Ignaz could have very clearly just had a higher degree of emotional intelligence, step back and address that situation in a far different manner. But instead he just got angry and let his passion take over and tried to beat people over the head with it to the point that everybody tuned him out and thought he was insane. And so those are lessons from the past that continue to play themselves again and again and again throughout the world that we live in, are the things that I find is so funny, Rob, that nobody learns from. People will scour medical journals and strength and conditioning journals, but they don't want to read about social intelligence, human nature, empathy, emotional intelligence, all these things that really are responsible for whatever message you have truly getting across or attuned to the populations that you're trying to get them to. And so I think the more people can read about emotional and social intelligence, Daniel Goleman's work, Robert Greene's work. Robert Greene's going to come out with a book, I think, in the next year or so on that in general. But Mastery is a tremendous book. If you don't read it or you don't stick with it or you think you're above it, I promise you're missing out. And I'll give you your money back for the copy that you bought if you didn't like it.
And I think that's why the things you put out on, especially on Twitter and things like that, are so valuable, because they are coming from so many different influences, and you can see that, which is great. So I won't keep you much longer, nearly on for an hour now. So just where can people keep us date with you? I mean, you've mentioned Twitter a few times. You're obviously very active on there. Where can people keep up to date with what you've got going on?
Yeah, I think the best way to probably stay up to date with what's going on is, it's just easy. If it's not social media, just even a basic Google. It's weird. I think I Googled myself for the first time ever just to make sure that there was nothing on there that shouldn't have been on. I had a crazy girlfriend in the past, right? So you just got to cover your bases. No, but I was just, and it's crazy. There was stuff that I had no idea that was on there, and, I could, but it does, this podcast will come up on there. Other podcasts will come up on there. So I would say that. Otherwise, social media or just reaching out to me directly. I can tell you the worst way to do it is Facebook. I use that less and less, and I know a lot of people send me messages on there, and I really value that, and I love that you reach out, but I just don't check them often. And so I always never wanted to be viewed as the guy of, I reached out to him and he big leagued me or he never got back to me. That will never be the case. If I don't get back to you on Facebook, it's because I do not check my messages on there. So Twitter, my phone number, I'll give that out if people want to reach out to me directly on Twitter. I'm not going to give that out on the radio, or just email Brett. It's just bbartholomew@teamexos.com, and those are the best ways, man. But I'm old school. I like face to face. I like direct communication. Skype is great too. Brett.Bartholomew1 on Skype is great. Always happy to talk.
Awesome. And the Mike Robertson podcast was excellent, by the way, that you did.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for that. I appreciate that. It's you guys all, you and Mike both do a great job of, with the questions and being so introspective and keyed in with that, man. I appreciate all you guys do, and you are big parts of helping this profession and the people in it grow by making this information accessible.
Cool. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Rob. Appreciate
that feedback, mate. Thank you. So I'll put all them links on the website so people can get easy access to them if they can't scribble them down at the time they're listening. So yeah, that's it for us. Just want to say thanks for your time, and we'll keep in touch.
Great. Yeah, sounds good.
Thanks, Brett. Thanks for tuning in to episode 50 of the Pacey Performance Podcast. Hope you enjoyed the chat with Brett. All links that Brett mentioned in the episode can be found at paceyperformance.co.uk/50. Don't forget to get over to the webinar page as well, where you can book onto the Pacey Performance webinar series number 1 with Mr. Dan Baker. All the information's on there. It'll be a great morning, and we'd both love to see you there. We've got some great guests coming up over the next couple of weeks that you'll really enjoy, and I will speak to you soon.